When 6-year-old Mia Santos looked up from the swing set at Riverside Park in Sacramento on a warm Saturday afternoon in late September and locked eyes with a tattooed stranger sitting on his motorcycle across the parking lot, she did something that would save her life. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds, longer than any child that age naturally would with a stranger, and then she did something even more deliberate. She looked at the man standing beside her at the swings, the man who'd been pushing her for the past 10 minutes, the man who kept saying they needed to leave soon. And then she looked back at the biker and mouthed 2 words with exaggerated clarity. Not uncle. The biker, a man named Victor Cruz, had been a detective with the Sacramento Police Department for 18 years before retiring, and he'd spent the last 6 years as road captain for the Silverback Riders Motorcycle Club. And he knew with absolute certainty what he'd just witnessed. That little girl was signaling for help, and the man beside her had no idea he'd been made. Victor had stopped at Riverside Park because his bike's engine temperature was running hot after 2 hours of riding in valley heat, and he'd pulled into the shade near the playground to let it cool down and check the oil. The park was busy that Saturday. Families everywhere, kids running between the playground equipment and the splash pad, parents on benches with their phones or chasing toddlers. It was the kind of scene that should have felt safe and normal, but something about it had caught Victor's attention the moment he'd killed his engine. A man, maybe late 30s, with thinning brown hair and glasses, wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt that looked deliberately unremarkable, was at the swing set with a little girl. The girl was small, maybe 6 years old, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail and a pink sundress over striped leggings. She wore light-up sneakers that flashed with every kick of her legs on the swing. The man was pushing her gently, talking to her in a voice too low for Victor to hear, and nothing about the scene should have registered as wrong. Except Victor had spent nearly 2 decades learning to read people, learning to spot the things that didn't fit, and this man's body language was all wrong. He stood too close to the swing, his hand lingering on the chain longer than necessary with each push. He kept scanning the playground and parking lot with quick, nervous glances, the kind of hypervigilance that came from knowing you were doing something you shouldn't. His smile was too fixed, too forced, and when other children came near the swings, he positioned himself between them and the girl in a way that looked protective but felt possessive. And the girl, she wasn't laughing or calling out like the other kids. She was quiet, almost frozen, going through the motions of swinging but without any of the joy that should have come with it. Her small hands gripped the chains with white-knuckled tension, and every few seconds she'd look around the playground with the same desperate scanning pattern Victor had seen in missing children before. That search for someone familiar, someone safe, someone who could help. Victor stayed on his bike, one hand on the handlebar, his phone already pulled from his vest pocket. He watched the man lean down and say something to the girl, and she nodded but didn't smile. The man checked his watch, a gesture that suggested a timeline, a schedule that needed to be kept. He said something else, and the girl's shoulders tensed visibly even from across the parking lot. That's when she looked at Victor. It wasn't a casual glance or the curious stare kids sometimes gave bikers with their leather vests and loud motorcycles. This was deliberate, focused, desperate. She held his gaze, and then looked pointedly at the man beside her and back at Victor, and her lips moved in that exaggerated, careful way. Not uncle. Victor's training kicked in before his conscious mind caught up. He dialed 911 while keeping his eyes on the swing set, keeping his posture casual like he was just checking messages on his phone. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and Victor kept his voice low and controlled. This is Victor Cruz, retired SPD detective, badge number 4127. I'm at Riverside Park on Carlson Boulevard. I have a possible child abduction in progress. Adult male, late 30s, khaki shorts, blue polo, glasses, with a female child approximately 6 years old, a dark hair, pink dress. The child just signaled to me that the man is not her relative. I need units here immediately, but quiet approach, no sirens. Subject appears nervous and may flee if spooked. The dispatcher's voice sharpened with urgency, and Victor could hear her typing, dispatching units, while staying on the line with him. Sir, can you maintain visual contact without engaging? Officers are 3 minutes out. Victor confirmed he could, and watched as the man helped the girl off the swing. The man's hand closed around her wrist, not her hand, and Victor saw the girl wince slightly at the grip. They started walking toward the parking lot, toward a gray Honda Accord parked in the far corner, away from other vehicles. The man was moving with purpose now, done with the charade of playground time, ready to leave. Victor made a decision. He couldn't let that car leave the parking lot. Once they were mobile, once they hit the street, the situation became exponentially more dangerous and harder to contain. He fired up his Harley, the engine's rumble cutting through the playground noise, and rode slowly across the parking lot, positioning himself behind the gray Accord, close enough that the car couldn't back out without hitting his bike. The man stopped walking, his head snapping toward Victor with immediate alarm. Victor killed his engine and sat there, phone still to his ear, his expression neutral, but his eyes locked on the man. The girl had frozen in place, her wrist still caught in the man's grip, her eyes wide as she looked between Victor and the man. The man's face went through several expressions in quick succession: confusion, irritation, calculation, and then something that looked like panic, barely contained. He pulled the girl closer to him, too close, his other hand going to his pocket where Victor's experienced eye caught the outline of what might be a phone or might be something worse. "Excuse me," the man called out, his voice trying for friendly but landing on defensive. "You're blocking my car." Victor didn't move. He kept his phone visible, kept his posture relaxed but ready, and said nothing. The silence was deliberate, a tactic he'd used 100 times in interrogations. Let them talk, let them explain, let them dig their own hole. The man's smile was strained now, his grip on the girl's wrist tightening until she made a small sound of pain. "I need to get my niece home. Her mother's expecting us. Could you move your bike?" The girl's face went pale, and Victor saw her shake her head, a tiny movement, a silent plea. "Not uncle," she'd said, "not family." This man was lying, and he knew Victor knew it. Victor finally spoke, his voice carrying across the parking lot with the calm authority of someone who'd spent 2 decades commanding crime scenes. "What's your niece's name?" The man's smile flickered. "Mia. Her name is Mia. And what's your name, sir?" The man hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long. David Santos. I'm her uncle. I'm her. I picked her up from her friend's house." Victor nodded slowly, still not moving. "What's Mia's mother's name, David?" The man's face tightened. "That's really none of your business. I don't know who you think you are, but you need to move your bike and let us leave. You're making my niece uncomfortable." Victor looked at the girl, at Mia, and spoke directly to her for the first time. "Mia, do you know this man? Is he really your uncle?" The girl's eyes filled with tears and she shook her head, the movement small but unmistakable. Victor saw the exact moment the man realized his story was collapsing, saw the calculation in his eyes as he weighed his options. The man's hand moved toward his pocket again, and Victor was already off his bike, his body positioned between the man and the parking lot exit, his phone now held up with the screen visible, showing the active 911 call. "Sacramento PD is 90 seconds out," Victor said quietly. "You can wait here calm and cooperative, or you can make this harder. Either way, you're not leaving with that child." For a moment, Victor thought the man might run, might try to grab Mia and bolt. The man's eyes darted toward the playground, toward the street, calculating escape routes, but Victor was bigger, younger in spirit if not in years, and positioned perfectly to intercept any attempt. The man's shoulders sagged slightly, the fight draining out of him as the reality of the situation set in. He released Mia's wrist, and she stumbled backward, putting distance between them, her small body shaking. Victor kept his eyes on the man but spoke to Mia. "Sweetheart, come stand behind me. You're safe now. The police are almost here." Mia ran to Victor and positioned herself behind his leg, her small hands gripping his jeans, and Victor felt her trembling through the denim. 2 Sacramento PD patrol cars pulled into the parking lot with no sirens but lights flashing, smooth and professional. Officers emerged with hands on their weapons, approaching with the controlled urgency of professionals who'd been briefed on the situation. The man, David or whatever his real name was, raised his hands slowly, his face a mask of false confusion. "Officer, I don't know what this is about. I was just leaving with my niece and this man blocked my car and threatened me." One of the officers, a woman with sergeant stripes whose name tag read Chen, ignored the man and knelt down to Mia's level. "Hi, sweetheart. I'm Sergeant Chen. Are you okay? Did anyone hurt you? Mia shook her head but didn't let go of Victor's leg. That man said he knew my mom. He said she was in an accident and he was supposed to take me to the hospital, but he wouldn't let me call her. He wouldn't let me use his phone. And when I said I wanted to go back to my friend's house, he said we had to leave now. Chen's expression hardened and she stood, gesturing to her partner who moved to detain the man. Sir, I need you to put your hands behind your back. We're going to have a conversation downtown. The man's protests increased in volume and desperation, but the officer was already cuffing him, reading him his rights with practiced efficiency. Chen turned to Victor. You're the one who called it in? Victor nodded and provided his information, his background, what he'd observed. Chen listened carefully and made notes. Mr. Cruz, your instincts potentially saved this child. The story about the mother's accident is a classic abduction tactic. We're going to need you to give a full statement. First, though, we need to locate Mia's actual family. Mia, sweetie, do you know your mom's phone number? Mia recited the number from memory, her voice small but clear, and Chen immediately called it. The woman who answered must have identified herself as Mia's mother, because Chen's tone shifted to urgent, but reassuring. Ma'am, this is Sergeant Chen with Sacramento PD. Your daughter Mia is safe and with us at Riverside Park. She's unharmed. I need you to come to this location immediately. There was a pause, and Victor could hear the woman's voice rising in panic through the phone. Chen provided calm instructions and ended the call. Mia's mother will be here in approximately 10 minutes, Chen reported. She thought Mia was at a friend's house 2 blocks from here. The friend's mother dropped Mia at the playground on her way to run errands, and Mia was supposed to wait there for her own mother to pick her up in 20 minutes. The suspect apparently approached her within minutes of her being alone. Victor looked down at Mia, still clinging to his leg, and felt a familiar mix of rage and relief. 20 minutes alone at a playground, and this predator had found her, groomed her with a convincing story, and nearly gotten her into his car. If Mia hadn't been smart enough to signal for help, if Victor hadn't been there, if he hadn't trusted his instincts and acted immediately, this little girl would have disappeared into a nightmare that might never have ended. The next 10 minutes felt like an hour. Mia stayed close to Victor while Sergeant Chen coordinated with additional units and began processing the scene. The man who'd called himself David Santos was in the back of a patrol car now, his false mask of confusion replaced with sullen silence. Other officers were canvassing the playground, looking for witnesses, checking for security cameras in the parking lot. A detective arrived in an unmarked sedan, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes who introduced herself as Detective Laura Vasquez and immediately began photographing the gray Honda Accord and documenting its license plate. Victor watched as she looked through the car windows with a flashlight, even in daylight, and he saw her expression change, saw her jaw tighten as she spotted something in the back seat. She called Sergeant Chen over, and they had a quiet conversation before Chen returned to Victor and Mia. Mr. Cruz, I'm going to ask you to keep Mia with you for just a few more minutes while we secure some evidence. Detective Vasquez found restraints and duct tape in the suspect's vehicle, along with what appears to be a prepaid phone and several printed photographs of children at this playground. This wasn't opportunistic. He was hunting. Victor felt Mia's grip tighten on his leg, and he rested a hand gently on her shoulder, keeping his voice calm even though his insides were churning with anger. She's safe now. That man can't hurt her or anyone else. Chen nodded and moved back to confer with Vasquez, while Victor knelt down to Mia's level. You did something really brave today, Mia. Brave. Do you remember what it was? Mia looked at him with those 2 wide eyes that had first caught his attention at the swings. I looked at you. My mom told me if I ever felt scared and couldn't find her, I should look for a police officer or a firefighter or a mom with other kids. But I saw you on your motorcycle and you looked strong, and I thought maybe you would help. So I tried to tell you with my face because he wouldn't let me talk to anyone. You did exactly right. You trusted your gut when something felt wrong, and you found a way to ask for help even when he was controlling you. That took real courage. Mia's eyes filled with tears again. I was so scared. He knew my name. He knew where my friend lived. He said my mom was hurt and I had to go with him right away. But something felt wrong, and I remembered Mom said never go anywhere with someone, even if they say it's an emergency without calling her first. And when he wouldn't let me call her, I knew he was lying. Victor felt his throat tighten. Your mom taught you well, and you listened. You saved yourself today, Mia. I just helped a little bit. A car pulled into the parking lot fast, tires squealing slightly, and a woman jumped out before it had fully stopped. She was maybe 35, with dark hair like Mia's, and a face that showed absolute terror transforming into overwhelming relief. Mia saw her and broke away from Victor, running across the parking lot, screaming, "Mom!" and the woman caught her daughter and dropped to her knees, holding Mia so tightly that Victor could see both of them shaking from where he stood. The woman was crying, pressing her face into Mia's hair, saying, "Baby, baby, you're okay. You're safe," over and over like a prayer. Mia clung to her mother and sobbed, all the fear and control she'd been maintaining finally breaking apart now that she was safe in familiar arms. Victor stayed back, giving them space, but Sergeant Chen gestured for the mother to come over once she'd had a moment to confirm Mia was physically unharmed. The woman approached, still holding Mia on her hip, even though the girl was really too big to carry, one hand stroking her daughter's hair in an endless loop of reassurance. She looked at Victor with tears streaming down her face. "You're the man who stopped him. The officer said you saw Mia's signal, and you blocked his car and called the police." Victor nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude, with being treated like a hero when all he'd done was pay attention and act. "Your daughter is incredibly smart and brave, ma'am. She did everything right." The woman whose name Victor learned was Carmen Santos shook her head. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't seen her, if you hadn't believed her—" She couldn't finish, overwhelmed by the reality of what almost happened. Detective Vasquez approached and introduced herself, explaining that she needed to take Mia and Carmen to the station to give statements and that there would be a victim advocate there to help them through the process. She also needed to inform Carmen that the man in custody was not using his real name, that his actual identity was still being determined, but that the items found in his vehicle suggested this was not his first attempt at abducting a child from this location. Carmen's face went pale, and she held Mia tighter. Other children. He was doing this to other children. Vasquez's expression was grim. "We're investigating that possibility now. What we know for certain is that your daughter's courage and Mr. Cruz's intervention stopped whatever he had planned today. We'll need Mia to describe exactly what happened, what he said to her, how he approached her. I know that's difficult, but it's important." Carmen looked at Victor with a question in her eyes, and he understood what she was asking. "I'll come with you if you want. Give my statement at the same time. Sometimes it helps to have someone there who understands the process." Carmen nodded gratefully. Before they left for the station, Vasquez pulled Victor aside. "Mr. Cruz, I ran your information. You had a hell of a career with SPD. Missing persons, child crimes, undercover work. You've got good instincts and you trusted them today. A lot of people see things that feel off, but they talk themselves out of acting because they don't want to be wrong or cause a scene or look foolish. You didn't hesitate." Victor shrugged. "I've seen too many cases where people hesitated and kids disappeared. I'd rather be wrong and embarrassed than right and too late. That little girl looked at me and told me she needed help. I couldn't ignore that." At the police station, the next several hours were a blur of statements and interviews and waiting. Mia was incredibly articulate for a 6-year-old, describing how the man had approached her at the playground within minutes of her being alone, how he'd known her name and her friend's name, and had told her that her mother had been in a car accident on her way to pick her up. He'd said he was a friend of her mother's and had been asked to get Mia and bring her to the hospital immediately. When Mia had asked to call her mom first, he'd said there wasn't time, that her mom was in surgery and couldn't answer. He'd been calm and convincing, and had guided her away from the playground before she'd fully realized what was happening. By the time her instincts had started screaming that something was wrong, they were at his car and he had her wrist in a grip she couldn't break. But Mia had remembered what her mother taught her. She'd looked for help. She'd scanned the playground and parking lot for someone safe, someone who might listen, someone who might act. And she'd seen Victor on his motorcycle and made a choice to trust him. Carmen listened to her daughter's account with tears running silently down her face, one hand never leaving Mia's shoulder. When it was Victor's turn to give his statement, he walked Detective Vasquez and a district attorney investigator through every detail. What he'd observed, Why it had caught his attention, the specific behaviors that had triggered his training, the deliberate signal Mia had given him, his decision to block the vehicle and call for help. The investigator asked why he'd been so certain, how he'd known the man was lying about being family. Victor explained about the wrist grip versus hand-holding, about the nervous scanning and hypervigilance, about the girl's frozen affect and desperate searching, about the way she'd mouthed "not uncle" with such deliberate clarity that there was no room for misinterpretation. Hours later, when the official interviews were complete and victim services had provided resources and support to Carmen and Mia, the three of them walked out of the police station into early evening light. Carmen stopped in the parking lot and turned to Victor. "I don't know how to thank you. What you did today, believing Mia, acting immediately, staying with us through all of this." She paused, searching for words. "You gave me back my daughter. You gave Mia back her future. Everything that didn't happen today because you were there and you paid attention." Victor felt the familiar burning behind his eyes that he'd learned to control over years of seeing terrible things and beautiful things in equal measure. "You already thanked me, ma'am. You raised a smart, brave daughter who knew to ask for help and who trusted her instincts when something felt wrong. That's what saved her. I just happened to be the person who was paying attention when she needed someone." Carmen pulled a card from her purse and wrote her phone number on the back. "I'd like to stay in touch if that's okay. I'd like Mia to remember that there are good people in the world who help when help is needed. And selfishly, I'd like to be able to call the man who saved my daughter more than just a stranger who happened to be there." Victor took the card and nodded, his throat too tight for easy words. Mia, who had been quiet and exhausted, suddenly perked up. "Can Victor come to my birthday party? It's in 3 weeks. I'm turning 7. Carmen smiled through fresh tears. "If he wants to, absolutely." Victor looked at this little girl who'd been so terrified just hours ago and was now thinking about birthday parties and found himself smiling. "I'd be honored, Mia. You let me know when and where, and I'll be there." Over the following weeks, the full scope of what Victor had interrupted became clear. The man who'd called himself David Santos was actually Robert Henshaw, a registered sex offender from Nevada who'd violated parole and disappeared 6 months earlier. The photographs found in his vehicle were surveillance images of children at Riverside Park and 2 other Sacramento playgrounds, all girls between ages 5 and 8, all photographed alone or separated from parents. Police believed he'd been scouting locations and potential victims for weeks, waiting for the right opportunity. Mia had been that opportunity, a brief window when she was alone and vulnerable, and Henshaw had moved quickly with a practice story designed to create urgency and compliance. If Victor hadn't been there, if Mia hadn't signaled, if he hadn't acted, the outcome would have been catastrophic. Detective Vasquez called Victor 2 weeks after the incident to update him on the case. Henshaw was facing multiple charges, including attempted kidnapping, possession of restraints with intent, violation of sex offender registration, and parole violation. The district attorney was building a case that would likely put him away for decades. She also told Victor that the Sacramento Police Department wanted to formally recognize his actions, that there was talk of a civilian commendation. Victor declined politely, saying he didn't need recognition for doing what anyone should do when a child asks for help. Vasquez laughed. "Most people wouldn't have seen what you saw, Mr. Cruz. Most people would have looked away or convinced themselves they were imagining things. You trusted your gut, and you acted. That's rare and it's valuable. We're hoping you might consider doing some training with our officers on recognizing pre-abduction behaviors and trusting intervention instincts." Victor agreed to that, seeing value in sharing what he'd learned over 2 decades of working child crimes. He started volunteering with the Sacramento PD Community Outreach Program, running workshops on child safety, helping parents understand how to teach their children to recognize danger and ask for help, training adults to trust their instincts when something felt wrong. The workshops always started with Mia's story, with a reminder that children who are being targeted often try to signal for help in subtle ways and that paying attention matters. 3 weeks after the incident, Victor showed up at Mia's 7th birthday party at a local park with a gift he'd spent considerable time selecting. A child-sized leather jacket, not a motorcycle club vest, but something inspired by it, with patches that read, "Be brave, trust your gut, and ask for help," sewn onto the back. Mia loved it and wore it for the rest of the party, showing everyone who would look and telling the story of how she'd signaled to the biker man who'd saved her. Carmen pulled Victor aside later in the afternoon while Mia was playing with her friends. She's in therapy now, processing what happened, learning tools to manage the anxiety and fear. But she's doing remarkably well considering. Her therapist said one of the reasons she's healing so quickly is because she feels empowered rather than victimized. She made a choice to ask for help, and her choice worked. Someone listened and believed her and acted. That's changed how she sees herself in the world. Victor watched Mia laughing with her friends, wearing her leather jacket like armor. She's a remarkable kid, strong and smart. Carmen nodded. She talks about you constantly, the man who saw her when she needed to be seen. You've become part of her story in the best possible way. Not the scary part, but the part where help arrived and safety was restored. The Silverback Riders Motorcycle Club heard about what happened and started a program they called Eyes Open Initiative, inspired by Victor's intervention. They ran community workshops teaching people to recognize signs of child abduction, trafficking, and distress. They taught parents to teach children that asking strangers for help in genuine emergencies was smart and necessary, that stranger danger had to be balanced with stranger safety. They distributed cards with warning signs and instructions on what to do if you saw something wrong. Over the next 3 years, 5 more Silverback members recognized and intervened in suspicious situations based on that training. 3 were attempted abductions, 1 was a lost child with special needs, 1 was a teenager in crisis. Each time someone paid attention, each time someone trusted their instincts, each time someone was willing to act even if they might be wrong, a life was changed for the better. Victor kept one thing from that afternoon at Riverside Park, a photograph that Carmen had given him months later. It showed Mia at her birthday party wearing her leather jacket, smiling at the camera with genuine joy, her eyes clear and bright and free of the terror he'd seen at the swings. On the back, Carmen had written in careful script, "Thank you for seeing my daughter when she needed to be seen. Thank you for believing her. Thank you for acting when others might have looked away. You gave us both back our lives." The photo hung in Victor's home office alongside his retirement badge and the various commendations from his police career, a reminder that sometimes the most important work happened not during official duty, but in the unplanned moments when someone chose to pay attention and act. When Mia turned 10, she participated in a school project about heroes and chose to interview Victor. She asked him questions about why he'd noticed her that day, how he'd known something was wrong, what had made him decide to block the car and call police. Victor answered honestly, explaining about training and experience, but also about gut instinct and the choice to trust that instinct even when you might be wrong. Mia's final question was what he wanted other people to learn from what happened. Victor thought for a moment before answering. "I want people to understand that children who are in danger are often trying to ask for help in ways that adults miss because we're distracted, or we don't want to get involved, or we convince ourselves we're imagining things. Paying attention matters. Trusting your instincts matters. Being willing to look foolish or cause a scene if it means a child stays safe matters." Mia looked scared that day, and she found a way to tell me she needed help. All I did was believe her and act. That's what any adult should do when a child asks for help. The story of Mia at Riverside Park became part of community legend in Sacramento, a reminder that predators operate in plain sight and that ordinary people have the power to stop them by simply paying attention and choosing to act. It became a training case study at the police academy for how civilian intervention could prevent crimes before they occurred. It became a story parents told their children about trusting your instincts and knowing that asking for help even from strangers was okay when you were in real danger. Mia grew up knowing that her voice mattered, that her signal for help had been seen and answered, that the scary thing that almost happened had been stopped because she'd been brave enough to ask and someone had been present enough to see. And Victor rode on with his brothers, carrying in his heart the knowledge that his years of service hadn't ended with retirement, that the skills and instincts he'd developed over decades still had purpose, and that one afternoon, in a park, being in the right place at the right time, and making the choice to trust what he saw had changed everything for one little girl and her mother. The Silverback Riders still run their Eyes Open initiative, still teach people to recognize danger, still remind communities that awareness saves lives. And whenever they tell the story of why they started the program, they begin with Mia at the swings, mouthing "not uncle" to a stranger on a motorcycle, and they end with the reminder that sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is simply pay attention when someone is trying to be seen, believe them when they ask for help, and act immediately when action is needed. Because the difference between tragedy and safety can be measured in seconds and in one person's willingness to trust their gut and do what's right even when it's uncomfortable or uncertain. Share this story if you believe in the power of paying attention. Subscribe if you want to remember that ordinary people can be heroes by simply choosing to see and act, and tell us in the comments if you've ever noticed something that felt wrong and made the choice to intervene. Because your awareness matters, and your willingness to act when children need help can change everything.